The silence in Alara Vance's room wasn't just quiet. It was a profound, aching stillness, broken only by the faint hum of the expensive air purifier and the rustle of her own breath. At 6 years old, Alara existed in a world meticulously crafted by her adoptive parents, a world of muted colors, plush carpets, and carefully chosen educational toys. Her room, impeccably neat, felt more like a museum exhibit than a child's sanctuary. Her porcelain dolls sat stiffly on a shelf, their unblinking eyes mirroring the polite, distant gaze her parents often offered. No crayon marks marred the pristine white walls, no blocks lay scattered on the floor. Alara sat cross-legged on the thick rug, facing an empty, upholstered armchair. Her voice, soft and earnest, filled the void, weaving stories of her day to an unseen listener. And then, Mr. Henderson, the squirrel, tried to take Mrs. Higgins's acorn, but I told him that wasn't very fair, didn't I, Leo? She paused, tilting her head slightly, as if receiving a whispered reply. You're right, Leo. He just needed a little reminder about sharing. Her parents, Robert and Eleanor Vance, were good people, conscientious and well-meaning. They provided Alara with every material comfort, every educational opportunity. They loved her, in their own structured, methodical way, but their affection felt like a carefully managed investment, devoid of the spontaneous warmth or messy embraces Alara sometimes witnessed between other children and their parents. Dinners were quiet affairs, punctuated by polite inquiries about her school day, followed by long stretches of comfortable silence. Playtime was often supervised, their interactions gentle but reserved, as if afraid to disturb the immaculate order of their lives. When Alara spoke of Leo, her parents would offer indulgent smiles. That's lovely, darling, Eleanor would say. Your imagination is truly blossoming. Robert would nod, returning to his newspaper. Their dismissal wasn't unkind, but it was absolute. They saw an imaginary friend. Alara saw her only confidant. One blustery afternoon, Alara returned from kindergarten, her cheeks flushed, a small, vibrant drawing clutched in her hand. It was a crude but heartfelt depiction of the school's elderly gardener, Mr. Petrov, his usually stoic face softened by a smile, surrounded by exaggerated, cheerful flowers. Mr. Petrov had been unusually quiet and withdrawn that week, his shoulders hunched as he tended to the rose bushes. Leo said Mr. Petrov looked sad today, Alara explained to her mother, her small voice earnest. And Leo said that sometimes, even grown-ups need a little bit of sunshine. She then insisted on taking the drawing out to the garden. Eleanor, always keen to encourage Alara's creativity, gently ushered her outside. Alara approached Mr. Petrov, who was meticulously pruning a rose bush, his weathered hands moving with practiced slowness. Mr. Petrov, she piped up, holding out the drawing. Leo said you might like some sunshine. Mr. Petrov slowly straightened, his eyes, usually distant, widening slightly as he looked at the colorful drawing. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor touched his lips, and for the first time in days, a genuine, if brief, smile crossed his face. He took the drawing, his gnarled fingers surprisingly gentle, and tucked it carefully into his overalls pocket. "Thank you, little one," he murmured, his voice gruff but tinged with unexpected warmth. "That's very kind." He didn't ask who Leo was. He simply accepted the unexpected gesture of empathy. Eleanor, observing from the kitchen window, felt a ripple of pride. "See, Robert," she remarked later, "Alara's little imaginary friend is certainly teaching her good manners and empathy. It's quite charming." Robert grunted in agreement from behind his business papers. They saw an act of kindness, a credit to their disciplined upbringing. They missed the subtle, profound insight that Alara attributed directly to Leo, the uncanny perception that transcended a child's understanding of human sadness. This small, poignant moment, where Alara performed an act of kindness inspired by her friend, Leo, solidified her inherent goodness and empathy in the reader's eyes, and subtly hinted at the positive guiding influence of her unseen companion. As Alara grew, Leo remained her constant, invisible companion. He wasn't just a voice, he was a presence, a quiet anchor in her structured world. But there were always subtle, uncanny details about Leo that defied the conventional definition of an imaginary friend. When Alara was 7, obsessed with a documentary about space, Leo suddenly started explaining orbital mechanics in terms that, while simplified, were remarkably accurate, far beyond anything a child could grasp. Leo said, "If you want to get to the moon, Alara," she once told her bewildered science teacher, "you have to use an elliptical trajectory, not just a straight line because of the gravitational pull." The teacher had chuckled, impressed by her advanced vocabulary, but a flicker of confusion crossed her face. On another occasion, when Alara was 9 and struggling with a complex math problem, Leo whispered a solution that involved a rarely taught algebraic shortcut, baffling her tutor. Leo said, "It's faster this way," Alara had insisted, her brow furrowed. Her parents, when told, would attribute it to Alara's exceptional intellect and vivid imagination, reinforcing their narrative of her being a gifted child. But the most unsettling detail was Leo's knowledge of specific facts about distant cities, not popular tourist destinations, but obscure neighborhoods, local customs, and even the names of small family-run cafes in places Alara had never seen on a map. Leo says the best baklava is in a tiny shop in the old quarter of Izmir, she once confided to her mother, describing a place in Turkey with such vivid detail that Eleanor thought she must have seen it in a book. Alara swore she hadn't. She often recalled Leo using phrases that were too mature, too complex for a typical imaginary friend, like strategic disengagement or asymmetry of information. Her parents always had a ready explanation, dismissing these as Alara's quirky way of expressing herself, or the result of her reading too many advanced books. Yet for Alara, these details coalesced into a quiet, unsettling puzzle. Leo wasn't just a figment of her imagination. He felt too real, too knowledgeable, too consistently present. He was her solace, her secret keeper, the only one who seemed to truly understand her quiet longings. The faded watercolor she kept hidden under her bed, a gift from Leo depicting a lone lighthouse by a stormy sea, symbolized her own isolation and the distant, guiding light of her unseen friend. This pattern of subtle, uncanny knowledge, consistently dismissed by her parents but keenly felt by Alara, served as the seed of mystery, creating a lingering question for the reader. Was Leo more than just a figment? Was he a clue to a past Alara didn't know, a profound connection waiting to be revealed? The quiet before the storm was indeed quiet, but beneath the surface, the tides of a hidden truth were slowly, inexorably beginning to turn. The tapestry of Alara's life, woven with threads of quiet routines and polite parental affection, began to fray at the edges as she approached a significant milestone: her college graduation. The sterile neatness of her childhood room had given way to the organized chaos of a university dorm, but the underlying sense of quiet solitude persisted. She excelled academically, her mind a sponge for complex theories and intricate designs, a trait her parents proudly attributed to her gifted intellect. Yet beneath the veneer of academic success, a subtle yearning for something more, something undefined, stirred within her. The catalyst arrived on the eve of her graduation. Alara, overwhelmed by the weight of expectations and the uncertainty of her future, found herself drifting into a fitful sleep. The dream that followed was unlike any she had experienced before. It wasn't the hazy, fleeting imagery of typical slumber. This was vivid, almost painfully real. "Alara," a familiar voice whispered, closer than she'd ever heard it before. It was Leo. But this time, he wasn't just a voice. He materialized before her, not as a blurry, childlike figment, but as a man. His features were distinct, kind, yet etched with a profound sadness. He wasn't the shadowy presence of her childhood imagination. He was tangible, real, his eyes the same warm brown as her own. "Leo," Alara whispered in the dream, her voice trembling. He nodded, a mournful smile on his face. "I was always real, Alara. More real than you knew." He reached out, his hand passing through hers like a wisp of smoke, yet the sensation was undeniable, a cold prickle on her skin. "They told you a story, Alara. A kind one, perhaps, but not the whole truth." Then, he revealed it. Not in words, but in a flash of images, searing themselves into her consciousness. She saw a tiny, sun-drenched cottage, nestled by a vibrant, wild garden, utterly unlike the manicured perfection of her adoptive home. She saw a small wooden locket, intricately carved, opening to reveal two halves of a faded photograph. One half, a baby Alara. The other, a man, young and hopeful, strikingly resembling Leo. And then, a final devastating image. A chaotic scene, a blur of flashing lights, raised voices, and the overwhelming scent of smoke. They said it was an accident. Leo's voice resonated, filled with a sorrow that transcended the dream. They said I was gone, but I was always watching, always here. Alara awoke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs. The dream lingered, every detail vivid, every word echoing in her mind. This was no ordinary dream. It was a memory, sharp and undeniable, yet profoundly unsettling. The cottage, the locket, the smoke, none of it fit the narrative her adoptive parents had carefully constructed about her birth, a narrative of a quiet, uneventful adoption after an anonymous surrender. The revelation directly challenged her identity, shaking the very foundation of her understanding of her life. Her initial reaction was a maelstrom of emotions, profound confusion, bordering on disbelief, mixed with a surge of suppressed grief and a terrifying sense of betrayal. She wanted to dismiss it, to rationalize it as stress from graduation, a vivid manifestation of her subconscious anxieties. But the images were too clear, Leo's presence too real, the emotional impact too raw. A terrifying yet compelling urge to investigate bloomed within her. It was a hunger for truth, a deep-seated longing for identity that she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. The quiet, compliant daughter felt a fierce, unfamiliar resolve ignite within her. The pursuit began subtly. Alara started by revisiting old family photo albums, scrutinizing every image from her early childhood. She looked for inconsistencies, for anything that might hint at a different past. Her parents, always meticulous record keepers, had curated these albums with almost surgical precision, each photo carefully labeled, each memory accounted for. Yet, Alara now saw gaps, a distinct lack of photos from her very early infancy, a period her parents vaguely explained as adjusting to family life. Then, a stroke of accidental luck. While cleaning out an old desk in the attic, a desk her parents had told her was too fragile to move, Alara discovered a hidden drawer, skillfully camouflaged. Inside, tucked beneath layers of moth-eaten fabrics, was a small, dusty box. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed tissue paper, lay the small wooden locket from her dream, intricately carved with a distinctive pattern of intertwining vines. It was warm to the touch, as if holding a faint echo of the past. Her heart leaped into her throat. With trembling fingers, she unlatched it. Inside, faded but undeniable, were the two halves of the photograph, a baby Alara, recognizable by her distinctive birthmark on her temple, and a young man, his eyes warm and familiar, unmistakably Leo. Beneath the locket was a small creased envelope. It contained a single yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline was stark: "Tragic Fire Claims Young Family." The article detailed a devastating house fire that had occurred nearly 2 decades ago, in a rural community, hours away. It spoke of a young father, a promising inventor, presumed dead in the blaze, and his infant daughter, rescued by quick-thinking neighbors but orphaned. The address of the cottage, the date, the description of the fire, it all aligned chillingly with Leo's dream revelation. This concrete discovery, a tangible piece of evidence, made it impossible for Alara to ignore the truth. The locket, the photograph, the newspaper clipping, they were not products of her imagination. They were real, undeniable fragments of a suppressed past, glaring contradictions to her adoptive parents' carefully constructed narrative. Her life, as she knew it, was built on a partial truth, a well-meaning deception that had shielded her from pain but also from her own identity. The quest for answers became unavoidable. She understood now that she had to actively seek out the full story of her origins. The fear of what she might uncover was immense, but the yearning for truth was stronger. This wasn't just about a dream anymore. It was about her very being, about reclaiming a history that had been stolen from her. The discovery pulled her inexorably into a world of hidden secrets, difficult confrontations, and a terrifying, yet exhilarating journey of self-discovery. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with emotional peril, but Ilara knew, with a quiet certainty, that she could no longer turn back. Her life as she knew it was over, and the true journey of discovering who she was had just begun. The weight of the locket and the faded newspaper clipping felt heavy in Ilara's hand, yet strangely liberating. The sterile air of her adoptive home, once a comfort, now felt stifling, charged with the unspoken truth she carried. Her adoptive parents, Robert and Eleanor, moved through their days with their usual meticulous calm, entirely oblivious to the seismic shift that had occurred within their daughter. Ilara watched them, a knot of conflicting emotions tightening in her chest. Love for their unwavering care, tinged with a growing resentment for their elaborate deception. She knew she couldn't blurt out the truth. Her parents, especially Eleanor, were delicate, prone to emotional fragility beneath their composed exteriors. A direct accusation would likely be met with denial, distress, or worse, another carefully constructed deflection. Ilara needed to be strategic, to subtly unveil the truth, much like Leo had done for her in her dream. She chose a quiet Sunday afternoon, their usual family tea time, a ritual of polite conversation and store-bought pastries. Ilara sat across from them in the sunlit living room, the clinking of teacups against saucers unnervingly loud in the tense silence. She took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad," she began, her voice carefully modulated, betraying none of the turmoil within. "I've been thinking a lot about my childhood recently. About my very early memories." She watched their faces, alert for any flicker of discomfort. Robert's expression remained placid, but Eleanor's hand, resting on her teacup, tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, darling," Eleanor said, a forced lightness in her tone. "Your imagination was always so vivid, wasn't it? Such a lovely trait for a child." She offered a soft, reassuring smile, a subtle attempt to redirect the conversation back to safe, approved territory. Ilara nodded, playing along for a moment. "It was. But sometimes," she continued, pushing slightly, "I feel like there are gaps, like there's something just out of reach." She paused, then deliberately introduced a specific detail Leo had shown her, a detail she knew her parents had carefully omitted from their stories. "I keep having this feeling, a memory of a really beautiful old wooden locket, with vines carved into it, and a tiny cottage with a wild garden, not like ours. Do you remember that, Mom? Was that from one of my early toys?" Eleanor's smile faltered. Her eyes darted, almost imperceptibly, towards Robert, a silent plea for him to intervene. Robert, however, seemed momentarily frozen, his usual composure cracking. A subtle tremor ran through Eleanor's hands as she reached for a biscuit, a defensive gesture that Ilara keenly observed. "A wooden locket, dear?" Eleanor repeated, her voice a shade too bright. I don't recall any such toy. Perhaps it was from a book you read. You were always so fond of your storybooks." She tried to steer the conversation, her gaze unwavering, but her rigid posture betrayed her. Ilara pressed further, using another specific detail from Leo, a memory that would be difficult to dismiss as mere childhood fantasy. "And what about the fire, Dad?" she asked, turning to Robert, her voice gentle but firm. "I remember the smell of smoke, a really strong smell, even in my dreams now. Was there a fire somewhere nearby when I was very, very little, before we moved here?" Robert flinched, a visible tightening around his eyes. He cleared his throat. "Fire, Ilara? No, darling, not that I recall. Perhaps a bonfire from a neighbor's yard. You were always a very sensitive child, very aware of your surroundings." His words were calm, but his hand clenched into a fist on his lap, a telltale sign of suppressed anxiety. His mind raced, wondering how Ilara could possibly recall such a deeply buried, traumatizing event. He dismissed it as a coincidence, a child's fragmented memory perhaps merging with something heard on the news years ago. "A sensitive child," Ilara repeated softly, her gaze returning to Eleanor. "Leo used to say that. He said I was very perceptive. He knew things no imaginary friend should know. She offered a wistful smile. Like how you always hide the good chocolates in the second drawer of the pantry, Mom. He told me that when I was 4. This trivial detail, so specific and harmless, had the unexpected effect of making Eleanor gasp, a small, choked sound. It was too accurate, too intimate, to be a random guess. Eleanor had only ever told Robert that secret. Ilara watched her parents' faces, observing their mounting discomfort, the forced smiles struggling against the dawning realization that their carefully constructed narrative was cracking. This was the moment where Leo's influence, now externalized through Ilara's questions, truly began to pierce their facade. Her parents, blinded by their desire to protect her from what they perceived as a painful truth, the loss of her biological parents, and the chaotic circumstances surrounding her adoption, continued their dismissals. "Ilara, sweetie," Eleanor said, her voice now edged with a brittle desperation. "We really think you're dwelling on these old fantasies a little too much. It's not healthy to live in the past. We are your family, your present, your future." Her words were loving, but her tone was firm, a subtle attempt to redirect Ilara away from her inquiries without revealing their deeper anxieties or secrets. Robert, recovering his composure, stepped in, his voice resonating with paternal authority. "Your mother is right, Ilara. We've given you a wonderful life, a stable home. There's no need to invent elaborate histories. Focus on your bright future, your career. We want what's best for you, always." They maintained their loving facade, but their dismissiveness of her earnest pursuit of truth, their subtle attempts to control the narrative, clearly revealed their misguided nature. They were convinced they were doing the right thing, protecting their daughter from what they believed would be a crushing revelation. Following this initial confrontation, Ilara's adoptive parents, driven by a deep-seated fear that their carefully guarded secret would finally unravel, began to subtly try and control her information access. They started accidentally misplacing old photos that might contain hints of her early life. Eleanor subtly redirected online searches on the family computer, away from adoption records or historical newspaper archives, always with a seemingly innocent comment about internet safety or focusing on your studies. Robert began suggesting new hobbies for Ilara, new social outings, anything to gently discourage her from dwelling on the past. "Perhaps you should join that hiking club, darling," Eleanor would suggest, her voice light. "It would be so good for you to get out more, clear your head." Meanwhile, she might quietly remove a historical atlas from the living room, a book Ilara had been idly flipping through, curious about distant towns. They were acting out of a misguided love, believing they were shielding her from pain. They were convinced that the less Ilara knew, the safer and happier she would be. This escalation, however, solidified them as well-meaning but misguided antagonists. Their actions, though driven by affection, inadvertently pushed Ilara further into her relentless quest for the truth. Every deflected question, every subtly hidden document, only confirmed her suspicions and fueled her resolve. She saw their fear, but also their continued deception, and it only hardened her determination to uncover the full story. The casual dismissiveness had transformed into an active, albeit subtle, obstruction, making Ilara's pursuit of her origins not just a desire, but a necessity. The lines of the conflict were drawn, not with overt malice, but with the tangled threads of well-intentioned lies and a daughter's unwavering pursuit of her authentic identity. The subtle obstruction from Robert and Eleanor only intensified Ilara's resolve. Every deflected conversation, every accidentally misplaced document, screamed louder than any direct admission. She became a silent detective in her own home, sifting through old photo albums, cross-referencing dates, and piecing together fragments of memory with the tenacity of an archaeologist. The locket, her tangible link to Leo in the past, became her compass, guiding her through the emotional labyrinth. The faint scent of forgotten paper and aged photographs filled her nights, a counterpoint to the polite emptiness of her days. Her parents, oblivious to the depth of Ilara's investigation, began planning a grand 25th anniversary gala. It was to be a lavish affair, held at the exclusive Vance Country Club, a monument to their enduring partnership and, implicitly, to the perfect, stable family unit they had so carefully constructed. Robert and Eleanor saw it as a celebration, a public reaffirmation of their successful lives and Alara's place within them. For Alara, however, the gala quickly morphed into the symbolic arena for her ultimate confrontation. It was the perfect stage, public, emotionally charged, and designed to reassert the narrative she was determined to dismantle. The dramatic irony was excruciating. Her parents, in their effort to celebrate their present, were unwittingly providing the platform for the explosive unveiling of their past. As the date of the gala approached, Alara felt the immense pressure building. She needed irrefutable proof, something that would cut through their well-intentioned denials. Her research led her down digital rabbit holes, unearthing dusty online archives of local newspapers from the rural community mentioned in the clipping. She discovered digitized fire reports, emergency service logs, and eventually, a faded police report. The details confirmed everything Leo had shown her in her dream. A young couple, both artists, with an infant daughter living in a secluded cottage. The fire, officially ruled an accident due to faulty wiring, had claimed the lives of the parents. The infant, miraculously, had been pulled from the blaze by a quick-thinking neighbor. The report, however, contained a crucial, tantalizing detail. The baby had been temporarily placed with a distant relative before being formally processed for adoption. A relative whose last name, a faded, barely legible scrawl, seemed eerily familiar. Alara knew she couldn't face this alone. She needed an ally, someone who could offer a different perspective, a more objective view. Her thoughts turned to Aunt Evelyn, Robert's eccentric older sister. Evelyn, a retired art historian, was the family's resident bohemian, known for her sharp mind and an uncanny ability to see beyond superficialities. She had always treated Alara with genuine warmth, a rare burst of spontaneity in the Vance household. Evelyn, Alara realized, might be her helper character. She arranged a discreet meeting with Evelyn at a quiet art gallery downtown, ostensibly to discuss a classical painting. Over hushed whispers, Alara shared her discovery: the locket, the newspaper clipping, the police report, and the persistent memories of Leo. Evelyn listened, her usually lively eyes growing somber, a deep crease forming between her brows. "My dear girl," Evelyn murmured, her voice barely audible, "I always suspected there was more to your adoption than your parents let on. Robert was always so guarded about it, said it was too painful, too complicated. But he always mentioned a distant relative who helped facilitate things after the incident." She paused, her gaze distant. There was talk, faint whispers of a brother, a gifted artist, full of fire, who simply vanished before the Vances adopted you. I remember Robert receiving a very distressed phone call around that time. He was never the same afterwards. Evelyn's words were a confirmation, a validation of everything Alara had begun to uncover. The distant relative who facilitated the adoption. A brother. An artist. It was all beginning to coalesce into a terrifying, yet exhilarating truth. Evelyn promised to help, quietly, discreetly, drawing on her own network of contacts to delve deeper into the adoption records, seeking confirmation of the biological father's identity and whereabouts. "Some secrets," Evelyn mused, "are meant to be uncovered, Alara, especially when they involve a child's right to know who they truly are." The gauntlet was now fully upon Alara. Her parents, caught up in the meticulous planning of the gala, seemed to sense her growing emotional distance. They redoubled their efforts to bring her back into the fold. Eleanor insisted on custom-fitting Alara for a stunning gown, hoping the material distractions would soothe her daughter's restless spirit. Robert meticulously went over the guest list with her, emphasizing the importance of family and reputation. They unwittingly created a ticking clock. The gala, a mere 2 days away, would be their public affirmation of their family narrative, an occasion that, once past, would make Alara's revelation infinitely more difficult. She had a limited window to present her findings before her parents succeeded in solidifying their redirection efforts, before their family unit, built on well-meaning deception, became too entrenched to break. The week leading up to the gala was a blur of frantic final preparations for Alara. She worked tirelessly with Evelyn, who had, with remarkable speed, located a private investigator with expertise in historical adoption cases. Together, they unearthed the full, devastating truth. The police report had been accurate: the fire, the orphaned infant, and the distant relative who had temporarily taken custody of the baby before the Vances adopted her. But there was a twist, a devastating layer of deception. The distant relative wasn't just a facilitator. He was the biological father's brother, Leo Thorne, a man who had survived the fire, but had been severely burned and emotionally shattered. The Vances, long friends with Leo Thorne's family, had stepped in. They had provided financial and emotional support to Leo Thorne, helping him recover physically, but also subtly coercing him into giving up his daughter. They had convinced him, in his grief and trauma, that he was unfit to raise a child, that Alara would be better off with a stable, wealthy family. They had even faked his death certificate to give Alara a clean, pain-free narrative, and to allow Leo to disappear and heal without the burden of his past. He had been Leo, her imaginary friend, from the start. He had never truly left her. He had been watching, waiting for the right moment to return. The revelation was a hammer blow. Her imaginary friend was real. Her biological father, whom she believed to be dead, had been a silent guardian, a constant presence in her life. Her adoptive parents, whom she loved, had been complicit in a profound, loving deception, a conspiracy of silence that had shaped her entire identity. The discovery left Alara reeling, a maelstrom of anger, grief, love, and desperate hope churning within her. The night before the gala, Alara sat in her room, the elegant gown hanging in her closet, a symbol of the facade she was about to shatter. The framed photograph of her adoptive parents, smiling serenely, seemed to mock her. She clutched the locket in her hand, the small wooden carving a tangible link to the man who had truly been there all along. The ultimate test was not just about revealing the truth. It was about confronting the tangled web of love and betrayal and forging a new path for her own fractured identity. She felt utterly alone in this moment, the burden of truth weighing heavily on her. Her adoptive parents, planning their joyous celebration, remained blissfully unaware that their carefully constructed world was about to collapse, revealing the profound, living secret that had walked beside them for decades. The dramatic irony was palpable, the tension almost unbearable. Alara knew, with a chilling certainty, that the next night would change everything, not just for her, but for all of them. The grand ballroom of the Vance Country Club glittered under the opulent chandeliers, a symphony of hushed conversations, clinking champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a string quartet. Robert and Eleanor, resplendent in their formal attire, moved through the crowd with an air of dignified satisfaction, basking in the glow of their 25th anniversary gala. They greeted guests, accepted heartfelt congratulations, and exchanged knowing glances that spoke of their perfect life, their perfect family. Their gazes frequently sought out Alara, who stood gracefully by a large window, a vision in her custom-fitted gown, a polite smile fixed on her lips. She was a testament to their success, the crowning jewel of their carefully curated existence. They remained blissfully unaware that the meticulously planned celebration of their past was about to become the very stage for its spectacular undoing. Alara's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a stark contrast to the elegant waltz music. In her clutch bag, nestled amongst a silk handkerchief and a compact mirror, lay the wooden locket, its carved vines pressing against the delicate fabric, a tangible reminder of the truth she was about to unleash. Beside it, folded discreetly, was the damning police report and the DNA test results, Evelyn's final, irrefutable gift. Elias had spent the evening circulating, exchanging pleasantries, her mind a whirlwind of anticipation and dread. She felt utterly alone in this moment, the weight of the truth a solitary burden. Her adoptive parents, radiating oblivious joy, cemented the dramatic irony of the evening. As the speeches began, Robert, tall and distinguished, took the podium. He spoke of his enduring love for Eleanor, of their shared journey, and finally, of their greatest joy, Alara. "Our daughter," he announced, his voice swelling with paternal pride, "is the light of our lives. She completes us. We chose her, and she chose us. It was always meant to be." Eleanor dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, a picture of sentimental bliss. The guests applauded warmly, a collective affirmation of the Vance family narrative. This was Alara's bated breath moment. She knew this was her only chance. She had to act now, before their carefully woven narrative became irrevocably sealed in the minds of everyone present. Taking a deep breath, Alara moved. She walked purposefully towards the podium, her steps silent on the plush carpet, her eyes fixed on Robert. A few guests noticed her, their smiles faltering as they sensed the shift in her demeanor. Robert, mid-sentence, saw her approaching, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Alara, darling?" he murmured, a question in his tone. "Is everything all right?" Alara reached the podium, standing beside him. She took the microphone, her grip firm, her gaze sweeping across the faces of her adoptive parents, then the stunned crowd. The music had stopped, the room falling into a hush so profound that the clinking of a dropped fork echoed like a gunshot. "Thank you, Dad," Alara began, her voice clear, steady, resonating through the silent ballroom. "That was a beautiful speech, and you're right. You did choose me, and I love you both for the wonderful life you've given me." A collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through the room. Robert and Eleanor exchanged bewildered, yet relieved glances. They assumed she was merely adding a sentimental touch to their celebration. "But," Alara continued, her voice gaining a quiet intensity, "there's a part of our story, a very important part, that has remained untold. A part that I only recently discovered." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, transforming the festive atmosphere into one of tense anticipation. She looked directly at her parents, her gaze unwavering. "You told me I was adopted after my birth parents anonymously surrendered me, that it was a quiet, private process." She opened her clutch, her movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out the locket. She held it up, allowing the spotlights to catch its intricate carving. "But this locket? It was never a toy. It was given to me by my biological father." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's face went white. Robert's jaw clenched, his eyes darting frantically, looking for an escape, a way to dismiss this. "Alara, darling, what are you doing?" Eleanor whispered, her voice laced with panic. "This isn't the time for childhood fantasies." "It's not a fantasy, Mom," Alara countered, her voice unwavering. She then unfolded the yellowed newspaper clipping and the police report, projecting them onto the large screens that flanked the podium, usually reserved for gala slideshows. The headlines screamed, "Tragic fire claims young family." The dates, the location, the devastating details of the cottage fire, all laid bare. "My biological parents," Alara announced, her voice trembling slightly now but firm, "were not anonymous. They were lost in that fire. My biological father was presumed dead." She then revealed the DNA test results, projecting them onto the screen as well, clearly displaying the match. Paternity confirmed. Child, Alara Vance, and Leo Thorne. A collective gasp, louder this time, swept through the ballroom. People turned to each other, whispering furiously. Robert and Eleanor stood frozen, their faces a mixture of disbelief, horror, and dawning comprehension. Eleanor clutched her husband's arm, tears streaming down her face. Robert, usually so composed, looked utterly shattered, his eyes glazed over with a profound, agonizing regret. "And he wasn't just a memory," Alara continued, her voice now filled with raw emotion. "He was there, always. He visited me. He spoke to me. He guided me. My imaginary friend Leo was always real." She looked at the faces of her parents, her voice softening, yet retaining its power. "He couldn't be with me, not openly. You told him he was unfit, in his grief. You told me he was gone, but he watched over me. From a distance. He taught me. He protected me. He lived, quietly, for me." Just as the silence threatened to consume them, a subtle shift occurred at the back of the ballroom. A man who had been standing unnoticed near an emergency exit slowly began to walk forward. He was tall, with a quiet intensity in his eyes that mirrored Alara's own. His hair was streaked with gray, and there were faint, faded burn scars on one side of his neck, barely visible beneath his collar. His presence was not flashy, but undeniable. He moved with a quiet certainty, his gaze locked on Alara. "Alara!" The man's voice, raspy but clear, resonated through the startled crowd. It was Leo. He stepped fully into the light, his eyes filled with a lifetime of suppressed love and longing, fixed on his daughter. "You found the truth, my little star. You always were so clever." The revelation was a hammer blow. The adoptive parents, already reeling from the public exposure of the fire and the DNA results, now stared at Leo, their faces contorting in horror and profound guilt. Eleanor let out a choked sob. Robert swayed on his feet, his perfect world crumbling around him. The guests, initially skeptical, then shocked by the corporate details, were now witnessing an unimaginable personal drama. From gossip and disbelief, their faces transitioned to dawning understanding, then to overwhelming empathy for Alara, and finally, to profound awe at the sheer, raw courage of her truth. Leo Thorne, her biological father, stood before them, undeniable proof of Alara's claims, his presence an emotional earthquake. Alara rushed from the podium, crossing the distance to Leo in a blur. She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder, her years of quiet longing finally released in a torrent of tears. Leo held her tightly, his own eyes brimming, his quiet vigil finally over. It was a reunion years in the making, a moment of profound catharsis that silenced the entire room. The world had come to witness a gala. Instead, they bore witness to a family shattered and then, impossibly, beginning to be reborn, openly, truthfully, under the dazzling lights of a public stage. The vindication was absolute, confirming Alara's victory as a profound personal and familial recognition of justice and the triumph of a long-suppressed truth. The glittering ballroom, once a stage for celebration, now hummed with the electric aftermath of a truth unveiled. Robert and Eleanor Vance stood utterly exposed, their carefully constructed world having shattered around them. Eleanor, pale and trembling, leaned heavily on Robert, who stared at Leo with a mixture of terror and dawning, gut-wrenching realization. The dignified facade they had maintained for decades had crumbled, revealing the raw anguish of their well-intentioned but deeply flawed deception. As Leo held Alara, a profound silence enveloped the room, broken only by a few muffled sobs from Eleanor. The guests, initially shocked spectators, now shifted their gazes, their expressions moving from judgment to a quiet, almost sympathetic understanding of the complex human drama unfolding before them. They saw not malice, but misguided love, not villains, but deeply flawed individuals grappling with the consequences of their choices. Later that night, in the quiet solitude of the Vance family study, the true reckoning began. Robert and Eleanor sat across from Alara and Leo, the air thick with unspoken words and years of suppressed pain. Eleanor was weeping softly, her usual composure utterly gone. Robert, his shoulders slumped, finally broke the silence. "Alara," he began, his voice hoarse, devoid of its usual authority. "Your mother and I, we are so profoundly sorry." He looked at Leo, his gaze filled with a desperate plea for understanding. "Leo, after the fire, you were so broken. The doctor said you might not recover. You kept calling for her, for Alara. We truly believed we were doing what was best for everyone, for you to heal without that constant, agonizing reminder, for Alara to have a stable, loving home, free from the chaos and tragedy." Eleanor, through her tears, added, "We loved you, Alara, from the moment we saw you. We wanted to protect you from that pain. We thought we were sparing you. It was never out of malice, only fear. And love." Leo, still pale from the shock of his dramatic reveal, listened intently, his gaze unwavering. "You took my daughter," he said, his voice quiet, almost mournful, "and you buried me alive. You took away my right to mourn, my right to heal as her father." His words, though devoid of anger, carried the weight of 2 decades of profound loss. Alara, now calmer, stepped forward. "I understand you thought you were protecting me," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "And I know you loved me. But you also took away my history, my right to know who I am, where I come from. And you took away his right to be my father." She looked at Leo, then back at her adoptive parents. The truth, no matter how painful, always sets you free. The adoptive parents, the misguided antagonists, faced the immediate emotional consequences of their deception. There was no legal punishment, no public shaming beyond the gala, but their carefully constructed family narrative had irrevocably collapsed. Their lives, once so orderly and predictable, were now permeated by a profound sense of regret and remorse. They acknowledged the immense harm their well-intentioned but harmful actions had caused. Robert, with a surprising display of vulnerability, offered to share all the original documents, every hidden detail of Ilara's birth and Leo's recovery, a gesture of transparency designed to begin the arduous journey of trust. Eleanor, once so rigid, simply held out her hand to Leo, a silent plea for forgiveness. The most significant new opportunity, however, was for Ilara herself. Her quest for truth had culminated not just in a revelation, but in the chance to build a genuine, multifaceted family. She now had two sets of parents, each with their own unique love and history to offer. It was a complex, beautiful tapestry, woven with threads of biological connection and profound adoptive love. This wasn't merely a material gain, it was a profound emotional and identity-based resolution. Ilara began spending time with Leo, listening to his stories of her biological parents, artists, just like her. She learned about their passions, their dreams, and the vibrant life they had cultivated in that small cottage. She learned about Leo's own journey of recovery, his quiet resilience, and the immense love that had compelled him to watch over her from afar. She was able to integrate her biological family history into her sense of self, finding a deeper sense of belonging and completion she hadn't known was missing. The Vances, in their journey towards healing, began to actively support Ilara's relationship with Leo. Robert offered Leo a substantial grant to restart his life, knowing the financial struggles he had endured. Eleanor, with surprising humility, began attending support groups for adoptive parents, seeking to understand the complexities of open adoption and the needs of adoptees. They were truly seeking reconciliation, not just with Ilara and Leo, but with the moral compass they had inadvertently compromised. A few weeks after the gala, Ilara sat with Leo in a quiet park, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. The locket, now on a chain around Ilara's neck, gleamed in the sunlight. Leo sketched quietly in a small notebook, a habit Ilara recognized from her own biological mother's journals. "It's strange," Ilara mused, "to suddenly have so many stories, so many memories that aren't my own, but are part of me." "They are your own now, Ilara," Leo replied, his voice soft. "They were always waiting for you, and your adoptive parents, they loved you, in their own way. We all have a place in your heart now." Ilara nodded, looking at the locket. "You were always there, Leo, even when I didn't know it." Leo smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that Ilara had only seen in her dreams. "And I always will be." Later, Ilara had a more tentative conversation with Robert and Eleanor. They had requested her presence, wanting to fully acknowledge their mistakes. "We want to learn, Ilara," Robert confessed, his voice heavy with sincerity. "To understand what you needed, what we failed to give you, despite our best intentions." Eleanor, eyes still red-rimmed, spoke of attending a seminar on adoptee rights, her voice reflecting a newfound humility. This dialogue, though difficult, reinforced Ilara's personal growth, her courage in seeking truth, and the broader themes of the story regarding identity, the complex nature of family, and the profound power of honesty. The new calm was not the absence of ripples, but the deeper, more profound peace that comes from embracing a full, authentic truth, even when it demands painful confessions and arduous forgiveness. The journey of rebuilding was just beginning, but it was a journey taken with open hearts and a newfound understanding. The Second Spring, an unveiled masterpiece. 2 years later, the once fractured pieces of Ilara Vance's life had woven themselves into a vibrant, harmonious tapestry. The quiet, solitary child who spoke to an unseen friend was now a woman radiating a profound sense of wholeness and belonging. Her past pain had transformed not into bitterness, but into a wellspring of wisdom and empathy, guiding her every step. Alara had chosen a career path that perfectly married her analytical mind with her newfound understanding of human connection. She worked as a senior consultant for a nonprofit organization specializing in family reunification services, particularly those involving adoptees and estranged biological relatives. Her unique perspective, having lived both sides of the adoption narrative, made her an invaluable asset. She helped navigate complex legal landscapes, offered emotional support to hesitant parents, and most importantly, served as a beacon of hope for individuals yearning for their own forgotten histories. Her personal quest for justice had blossomed into a broader sense of social responsibility, a legacy of truth and enduring love. Her family life, once a stark dichotomy between her adoptive and biological parents, had integrated into a unique, loving, and supportive network. Sundays were now a lively affair, with shared meals that effortlessly blended Eleanor's refined culinary tastes with Leo's preference for rustic, home-cooked dishes. Robert, once rigid and formal, had developed a surprising camaraderie with Leo, often discussing classic literature or quietly sketching alongside him during family gatherings. The wooden locket, now on a delicate silver chain around Alara's neck, was no longer a symbol of hidden pain, but a cherished emblem of her healed identity, a visible testament to the harmonious blend of her two families. Leo, fully recovered physically and emotionally, had re-embraced his artistic passion. He now ran a thriving art studio, specializing in intricate, emotionally resonant wood carvings, many of which told stories of hidden paths and unexpected reunions. He was a doting father, making up for lost time with Alara, sharing childhood stories she had only heard in dreams, filling the gaps in her early life with warmth and vivid detail. Eleanor and Robert, truly humbled by the events, had continued their journey of introspection and healing. Eleanor became a vocal advocate for open adoption policies, frequently speaking at conferences and sharing their story, with Alara's permission, of course, as a cautionary tale of well-meaning deception and the profound need for transparency. Robert, in a quiet act of atonement, had established an anonymous trust fund to support children's rights organizations, particularly those focused on ethical family reunification. Their initial guilt had slowly morphed into a genuine desire to make amends, to contribute positively to the very system they had once unknowingly exploited. One sun-drenched afternoon, Alara stood in a sprawling community garden, her hands gently tilling the soil. Beside her, Leo and Robert were meticulously planting a young oak sapling, its delicate branches reaching towards the sky. Eleanor observed from a nearby bench, a contented smile on her face. This garden, a joint project initiated by Alara's foundation, was designed to be a place of healing and connection, where families from diverse backgrounds could gather, grow, and share. "This little one is going to grow tall," Leo remarked, patting the soil around the sapling's base. "Just like you, Alara, strong and deeply rooted." Robert nodded, wiping dirt from his hands. "A testament to resilience, and the power of a good foundation." He caught Leo's eye, and for a fleeting moment, a shared understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the past they had to overcome, and the future they were now building together. Alara stepped back, surveying the vibrant garden. The air hummed with the gentle buzz of bees, the sweet scent of blooming flowers, and the soft laughter of children playing nearby. She watched her two fathers, a biological one and an adoptive one, standing side by side, united in a shared purpose. Eleanor, her adoptive mother, looked on with pride and a newfound serenity. The garden, lush and full of life, was a living embodiment of the second spring, a testament to healing and the profound beauty of reconciliation. It was a place where different roots converged, where past wounds could finally find solace, and where new life, vibrant and authentic, could truly blossom. Alara smiled, a deep, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She knew her journey wasn't just about finding her past. It was about building a future, one where truth, love, and connection reigned supreme. The image of her blended family, tending to the symbolic sapling, encapsulated the story's themes of healing, reconciliation, and enduring family love. It was a picture of completeness, of a spirit finally at peace, surrounded by the love that had always been there, waiting to be fully embraced. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.